So the RTX 3080 is already here, and finding one is already almost impossible, but we're still going to come up with some cool content. And in this case, we want to focus on AMD's Ryzen scaling. You see, if you caught our launch day coverage, which you can check it out right over here, and I hope you didn't miss that, we approached this release differently from the others. Honestly, it was a foregone conclusion that the RTX 3080 can beat the fastest GPU from last generation. We also wondered, could it dominate when you install it onto an older system? You know, could it give you performance or a massive performance improvement without giving your gaming rig a complete facelift? Instead of only pairing the 3080 with a super expensive CPU that's out of most people's budget, we installed it into a gaming system you could buy 3 years ago. And the results? Well, it turned out that an older i7-7700K only lost by a few frames per second at 1440p and was pretty much neck to neck with the 10900K at 4K. It was really impressive to see. But you know what's even more impressive? AMD's dominance in the processor market right now. There aren't just the more affordable option anymore. Ryzen is now the right choice for most users. Also, 3rd gen Ryzen CPUs and B550 motherboards are no-brainers for people looking for a more affordable system upgrade. So this video's purpose is to show Ryzen users what they can expect with an RTX 3080 and whether or not if they need to spend a lot of money to get the best out of it. Also, just like the previous video, we will be comparing current Ryzen CPUs to the ones that were launched almost 3 years ago. So let's get to that right after this.
Say hello to proper airflow with Be Quiet PureBase 500DX, a compact mid-tower with a mesh front panel and 3 140mm PureWings 2 fans that are silent and capable. Enjoy tasteful ARGB illumination, a Type-C port, and an easy case to work in. Check it out below.
Okay, so let's get some housekeeping out of the way before diving right into the benchmarks. What we're going with this video is sort of bookmarking the 1st and 3rd gen Ryzen desktop lineups. It all boils down to price. On one hand, we're using a 4-core, 4-thread Ryzen 3 1300X, which was one of the most popular budget processors back when it was launched in 2017 for about $130 US. And yeah, I know that using a super high-end GPU on an entry-level CPU might sound completely nuts, but it should give us some interesting baseline for the benchmarks or the results. Plus, why not? The best equivalent to that right now is the Ryzen 3 3100 that goes for about $120. It also is a native 4-core CPU, but AMD's now enabled SMT, so it has 8 processing threads. On the higher end is the Ryzen 7 1700X, which has 8 cores and 16 threads. A lot of people chose it over the 1800 since it was $100 less and it offered pretty similar performance, especially in gaming. The equivalent nowadays is the 16-thread 3800XT, which was launched at $400 and it happens to be our favorite CPU right now. This thing's just awesome. On paper, it has the same 4.7 GHz boost clock as the 3900XT and the 3950X, but our sample actually hits higher sustained frequencies in games than either of those. Basically, that means it's a better choice for a pure gaming system. The last minute addition for us was the 3950X, which Mike literally decided to throw into the test bench last minute. And of course, there's Intel's 10900K since it's the fastest CPU right now, so it's the benchmark all others will be measured against. Now, you might be wondering why there aren't any other processors here, and I guess I can just spill the beans right now. Believe it or not, the actual differences between the 1300X and the highest end Ryzen CPUs aren't that big as you might expect, in gaming at least. So the other processors just sort of fall into a narrow window. As for the rest of the test system specs, they're pretty identical except for the memory on 1st gen Ryzen. It just doesn't like the speeds in excess of 3000 MHz, so we kept it at that speed. Otherwise, all the test systems were configured identically. Since this is a super high-end GPU, we're going to be testing at 1440p and 4K only. Expect to see 1080p come back when we start looking at the 3070 though. Also, if you're using an ultra-wide 3440 by 1440 monitor, you can expect results that are a bit lower than 1440p, but not by a huge amount. So how does Ryzen react when you hook it up to the fastest GPU right now? Well, let's find out. Starting with Call of Duty, and right away you'll see that there's literally no visual difference between the 10900K, the 3800XT, and the 3950X. Things do tighten up a bit more at 4K, but the older CPUs are still pretty far behind. But like I said in other videos, the IW8 engine loves new architectures, frequencies, and more cores. At higher resolutions like these, CSGO still tends to be a bit CPU bottlenecked at 1440p, but the number of processing threads really doesn't make an impact. This is all about how well a given architecture can perform in lightly threaded operations, which is why the first-gen Ryzen CPUs fall behind even at 4K. Another thing you might start to see as these benchmarks go by is while the 1300X posts OK averages, its quad-core layout negatively impacts the overall smoothness of 1% lows in a lot of titles. In Doom, you can start seeing evidence of GPU bottlenecking in 1440p, so all the processors are pretty close to one another. That situation gets even more apparent at 4K. It's really amazing to see what happens when a game developer actually takes time to optimize their game properly. Flight Simulator 2020 is the exact opposite of Doom. It's super demanding on all of your system's resources, but it seems to love high CPU clocks and more than 4 processing threads. Then again, this could come down to optimizations too, because man oh man, this is a game that's really hard to run on any gaming rig. Zero Dawn brings us back to GPU bottlenecking again. That means all of the processors here perform almost identically to one another regardless of their generation. That's good to see for sure, since you could have any CPU from the 1300X to the 3950X and expect pretty similar frame rates in this game with an RTX 3080. Moving on to Rainbow Six Siege, and yep, we have another game that's GPU limited even at 1440p. 4K ends up being pretty much a tie even if you're rocking a $130 CPU from 3 years ago. In the last video, I mentioned the Unreal Engine has a lot of optimizations built into it for newer architectures, and these results prove it, but only at 1440p. Here, it's obvious that the CPUs are becoming a bottleneck, at least at the high end, but when you switch over to 4K, it's more of the same with a straight line between every single one of those processors. There really isn't much to say about Red Dead Redemption 2. It's all GPU bound. What's interesting is it seems like Rockstar's many patches have fixed some of the massive issues this game used to have with CPU scaling. So now, regardless of whether you're playing at 1440p or 4K, the graphics card will choke long before most processors become a problem for performance. But again, that quad-core architecture of the 1300X means its 1% lows results take a beating. One of the main problems with Overwatch is that its engine is limited to 300 frames per second, and it looks like all of these systems here can hit pretty close to that mark consistently with the RTX 3080 installed. At 4K, there's a bit of a GPU limitation, but honestly, at these kind of frame rates, upgrading your CPU to the best that's available right now isn't going to make a massive difference. Well, that ended up busting a lot of preconceptions, didn't it? You see, as I mentioned in our launch day coverage, using the fastest CPU to benchmark graphics cards eliminates bottlenecks, but it might give viewers the wrong impression that that's the type of hardware that they need for something like an RTX 3080. Because in reality, stepping up from a Ryzen 3 3100 to something like the Ryzen 9 3950X will net you a few frames per second, and that's usually it. Why, you may ask? Well, because at 1440p and higher resolutions, even the RTX 3080 can become a limiting factor, and that nullifies many of the advantages of high-end CPUs. Other cards like the RTX 3070 would see the gap narrow even more. But there are some exceptions, so I want to dive a bit further into what we saw. First of all, the 3900 XT and 3950X dominate in productivity apps, but the raw number of cores actually works against them in gaming by limiting frequencies in lightly threaded workloads. That means a more efficient CPU like the Ryzen 7 3800 XT can come along, bust out some high sustained speeds, and offer an equal to or better gaming experience, while costing hundreds less. The 1700X was a pleasant surprise because optimizations for these first-gen Ryzen CPUs have made them pretty competitive in our benchmarks. So with a few minor exceptions, you can pop in an RTX 3080 into an older AMD motherboard and expect frame rates that are within 15% of today's best CPUs. Now that's a cool upgrade story. You see, most games don't benefit from a massive number of threads, but there is a thin red line between enough and not enough processing threads. And I think that magic number seems to be 4 because we're starting to see older processors, quad-core CPUs like this Ryzen 3 1300X really struggle, especially when it comes to in-game smoothness. So this should be obvious, but I guess I'll say it anyways. Just don't pair a high-end GPU with a previous gen quad-core CPU because tons of performance will be left on the table. But enabling SMT on the budget Ryzen 3 3rd gen CPUs will make a world of a difference for AMD. So if you have a 1300X or 1200, you can confidently upgrade to the 3100 since it offers a low price and super competitive frame rates even against much more expensive CPUs. Also remember that the upcoming RTX 3070 and more affordable cards from NVIDIA will create a GPU bottleneck even sooner and therefore need less CPU resources than what you've seen here. Alright, so I just want to wrap up by leveling with you guys. Don't take this video as a recommendation to just go out and buy a low-end CPU and then pair it with an RTX 3080. That's just not an ideal setup. But take this video as a tool to evaluate what your needs are, and then hopefully it'll lead you to a better choice when it comes to your next upgrade or your next build. So on that note, thank you so much for watching. If you're actually interested in this sort of content, especially when it comes to upcoming GPU releases like the RTX 3070, let us know in the comments down below. I'm Ibo with Canucks. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, spend responsibly, my friends, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Nope, ding dongs. Thank you so much for watching. If you're actually interested in this sort of content, I give up.